OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Hello, I'm Bob Gourley, the Chief Technology Officer of OODA LLC, and today on the OODAcast, retired Admiral Mike Studeman. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Bob, glad to be here. Thanks for your service, not just in naval intelligence, but afterward as well. You've been a mentor to many.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And Mike, I know you as a leader who has over 35 years experience in operational intelligence and national security leadership. But I was wondering, would you mind giving us a little bit of your career arc?
Sure. I joined in 1989, actually right there on the cusp between what people would consider the end of the Cold War and then post-Cold War. We had Berlin Wall fell, we had Tiananmen Square massacre, a number of different things that kind of recharted the trajectory of the planet. And so I joined at that pretty heady time and embarked on 35 years in naval and joint intelligence, and doing various jobs throughout my time all over the world, and found that it was a very rewarding career to be involved in kind of the currents of history, shaping things where you could with the military instrument of national power, and trying to make wise choices for American foreign policy, many times with very senior leaders. So I ended up fortunately being selected for flag officer, and so I was the Director of Intelligence for the Southern Command, Director of Intelligence for the Indo-Pacific Command out in Hawaii, and then I ended my career in the ultimate position as the Commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence.
Well, and Mike, looking over your career, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, but it seems like most of your positions were in this operational intelligence kind of domain, either bringing all the information together and figuring out what's going on or leading teams that do that. Is that an accurate statement to say?
Exactly right. So you end up doing a number of different things, sometimes at the very tactical level, supporting units like squadrons and ships, but ultimately, as you grow more senior, you're piecing together all the things that are going on around you, anticipating what's happening next, advising senior leaders, kind of guiding the military as it supports foreign policy, but making sure, of course, you're paying attention to everything happening in the maritime domain, which is the seabed actually up to space, and being able to understand your adversaries, understand your environment, understand all the dynamics between friends and adversaries, and nation state threats, transnational threats, those kinds of things. So you're constantly challenged in this career path of intelligence. I found it to be very rewarding, and I think when I look back, the contributions make me proud that I was involved in something bigger than myself.
Right, great. And Mike, I want to talk about the book in just a second, but I also want to say another thing that I learned from your career is it's not just about intelligence to figure out what the adversaries are doing. You are actually driving decisions, presenting intelligence to operators that let them make the most informed decisions possible. And I think that's one thing that really impressed me about you in particular in your career. This whole operational intelligence career is about driving ops.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the more senior positions that I had, that you got into the high operational, low strategic level. So the ultimate strategic level would be for the president, the secretary of state, other federal agency leaders, department folks who are officials who are truly charting the course for America. But when you become more senior, you're only 1, 2, 3 degrees away from a lot of those interactions, particularly where DoD is consulted on some pretty major world events. And so I do think that early on in your career, you do begin tactical, you do have a lot of operational focus. You always have to have that in mind. You need to have that knowledge base that expands with time. But you get more involved in some of the upper reaches of the government and some of these more senior positions, and it's pretty heady stuff. many times you're there when the decision is made. You were there prepping your senior leader to take a position that ultimately may win the day. And so that's what you do as you become a little more senior, and you get these staffs that have roles that go up to the National Command Authority.
Right. And Mike, I know you're doing a lot of things today, but one of them is you're now author of an incredible book, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity. Really enjoyed the book. And in the book, you talk many stories from your career and actually before your career. A lot of insightful anecdotes, lessons learned, and things that you relied on through your career to make a difference in the world. So I really enjoyed the book.
Thanks, Bob, for reading it. It warms my heart that you have that kind of feedback. That's the true metric. Did somebody enjoy it while they learn from it? And if that is something that people get out of it, then it was worth the time invested in creating it.
Yeah, and I'm at a different stage of my career now, but still I want to continue to learn and continue to lead and grow. And I found your book helped me do that. It's really a good framework for continual learning, I think. It's also something that I can now pass on to others that may be at an earlier stage of their career to help with some mentorship. Here, learn from my friend, Admiral Mike Studeman.
Yeah, I do think that when I thought about the target audience, many more aged people, let's say 40s and above, may still be able to pick up pearls in this book, because some of it talks about leading large organizations and how do you get outcomes and effects. And so it's important to understand what it takes when you're leading thousands of people. And so I do think that there's advice for many kinds of people. But when I was writing it, I hoped that you would have people that are starting out in life, maybe those in their 20s and 30s, who still are developing their own leadership capabilities and competencies, and to give them a leg up and show them how to compete well in life, how to become a leader of consequence that is prepared for the tough challenges of our time. And unfortunately, when I took a look at many of the examples of leadership across the United States today, there are folks that you shouldn't follow their lead and how they do business. And I found when I looked at the numbers of polls and statistics that, in fact, the amount of trust in leaders has gone significantly south. 4 out of 5 people do not trust that their leaders are doing the right thing all the time. 4 out of 5 people in America believe that corporate America and the U.S. government are in a leadership crisis. 2/3 of people don't see anybody in their organization that they aspire to be. Those are really shocking statistics. And so it shows that we have a leadership problem in the country. And I wanted to help out with that and show how it can be done right. Because I learned from a lot of great leaders in my time too. And being able to put all that advice in one place and be able to pass it on to the next generation, for me, it was kind of like a good transition project as I came out of the Navy, and was able to now sort of teach in the wild without having a title or rank anymore, or direct leadership role. I could give back, I could pay it forward in a way that, made sense for somebody that cares about the course of our country.
Right. Well, Mike, you answered my big question there. I was going to ask you that. Why did you write the book? And I think you just clearly articulated the purpose of this book. And I enjoy that about it. So let me move on and say, and here's a question I ask a lot of people. What is leadership?
Yeah, I think leadership can be confused with management. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. So my definition of leadership is actually inspiring people to do things that they don't think themselves capable of. And so automatically you see a difference there. If you're to compare, let's say, leadership from management, management is about doing things right. And leadership is about doing the right things. Management would be, let's say, about how to do something. The leadership is giving the why, right? And so on the management side, you're going to be worried about handling somebody's perspiration, how much time on this project, are we getting the task done? But, when you're looking at leadership, it's not the perspiration so much, it's about the inspiration side of the whole thing. So you have this sort of contrast between things you have to do right, from a sort of bureaucrat's standpoint, but the leader needs to tap into the sort of ecstatic part, the enthusiasm, the excitement about the mission and purpose. Those kinds of things require a different kind of skill set than simply sort of managing and achieving something along, a particular line that gets to a set objective. It's about going after the heart as well as the mind, right? It's really tapping into what truly inspires trust and loyalty and gets people on board and willing to give their all for something. That comes through the skill of a leader, not necessarily the skill of a manager.
And Mike, would you say it's a true statement that leadership can't be taught, it has to be learned? You really have to want to be a leader.
So I think I have a whole chapter called Born and Bred, and I think I'd like to end the debate on this. You can be a great leader even if you are not born with sort of natural leadership advantages. There are people who were, your high school class president, maybe they're quarterback of the football team, those kinds of folks. The most popular people had sort of a magnetism early on. Those are natural qualities, but I make the point that if you're purposeful about being a strong, ethical, enlightened, inspiring leader, then you can develop those skills like you can make a muscle stronger. And it's a matter of your own inner drive, your battery, right? Your transmission, and how you intend to improve yourself. And I essentially say that, it doesn't matter where you begin. We all have the potential. It matters how far you're going to go by being a continual learner and somebody who is always open to figuring out how to improve on themselves. Those are the people that go the distance.
Yeah, and Mike, in the book, you share a lot of personal stories about ways that you were tested yourself in extremely stressful situations, and you and your peers had to rise to the occasion. It was like you were being forged yourself. I wonder, a lot of people won't go through that, say in business or industry. Does this mean that they don't have any hope of being a good, strong leader?
I think there are lots of different ways that you can be tested where you have the stresses, the time compression, the high stakes environment. You don't have to wear a uniform or be in the military or face some international crisis to go through these trials by fire and these crucibles of learning that allow you to really figure out what works and what doesn't work. I mean, there are things that can waste your time and be counterproductive if you haven't figured it out. And the price can be very high if you are not able to truly lead when it matters the most. So how do you have this sort of steady growth curve where you're willing to learn and you can learn from your subordinates, your peers, your seniors alike. You can learn through books. You can learn through examples from others, movies, everything. And so how you actually absorb that and then try to put your own stamp on what you learn and then express your leadership is a never-ending thing. If you really care about it, it becomes sort of a never-ending process where you always feel like you're going to encounter a new situation, new people, new circumstances. And if you're complacent about leadership, you may not be as ready as you should be later on. So I see this as a continual process of sharpening and refining and being a better leader tomorrow than you were yesterday.
Right, Mike, that's very well put and very helpful. And I think it underscores the point that you can also learn by reading books like yours. You can empathize with the person who's writing the book, understand what they were going through, and learn lessons even if you didn't go through them. So I think the person who wants to keep learning about leadership has a lot of options to do so.
Yeah, exactly right.
Cool. Well, so let's talk more about the book. You talk a lot about your career, but there's one section in there where you talk about yourself as a kid, and I got to tell you, you were a little rascal, but I guess a lot of young people were. And you also, and then related to that, you talk about some of the sailors under your command who had slipped up from time to time. And in both cases, there were situations where people had made mistakes. And instead of being crushed for their entire life, there was some amount of forgiveness and recovery and continuation. And I wanted to ask about the lessons you see in that from a leadership. How do you know what the right thing is to do in a situation where someone has erred?
You know, mistakes are just part of life. And obviously you want to minimize those where you can, but it's just part of the learning process for everybody. And when you're in any kind of organization, you'll have greenhorns all the way up to your most salty, experienced people. And so you're just going to face mistakes. People are usually trying their best. They've got the best of intentions, and circumstances led to perhaps something hasty and not quite right, or something else. And there has to be a high tolerance for how people learn. I think that the most important thing is to discern whether or not there's somebody who actually made a mistake based on an issue of character or ethics, right? Those things too, you have to take a hard look at it and say, do I have somebody who is, fundamentally of flawed character who will continue to make unethical decisions in my organization? Are they somebody that I can teach, mentor, and recover so that they can be on the right side of the ethical line, and I can truly have confidence in them no matter what they're facing, particularly when it comes to dealing with other people? If you judge after trying those efforts that somebody just is not going to work out, it's the rotten apple in your barrel, you need to do something about it, and you need to have the discipline to be able to recognize when somebody may need to be pushed away from your organization. And so this is a very hard call. You want to, these are rare cases typically what you find, but you have to find those people out as early as possible, because if you don't, they can end up being a real drag on your organization. Morale can plummet. They can be the toxins within your system, and that bloodstream circulates everywhere. And it's amazing how just a few bad actors in an organization can bring it down and prevent it from realizing its promise. So I do think this is an issue of discernment with regard to who's working with you and for you, and the ability to know whether or not you can correct something, if you can help somebody, because we're all on that learning curve. But when you get to intractable cases where fundamentally you don't think you can recover from how this person behaves, that it's hardwired into them, then you need to find a way to show them the exit door.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because the mission demands it in national security missions, but also in business as well. The business of getting stuff done and taking care of all your people, and if the wrong people can really screw that up.
Yeah, exactly. So, I do think we're in the people business. Leadership is about people, and we need to spend our time there. And in fact, I write about the importance of establishing the right climate. And my view is that when you get into a leadership position that, particularly more senior with many more people, you will never have somebody telling you, it's not going to come to your inbox, here, you need to take care of your climate. You need to proactively invest in that. You need to set the boundary lines. You need to talk about ethics. You need to talk about morals. You need to talk about character and that kind of stuff. And these are uncomfortable conversations. Most people sort of shy away from it. But if you do, don't be surprised when you find that you have people who cross, the guardrails and are doing things that are essentially disrupting your organization and your mission.
Yeah.
And so you have to get ahead of it. Otherwise, you're in the consequence management business, and you're constantly, trying to figure out why you have fires over here, left and right. You need to stop any fires from starting from the beginning, and that requires you to inoculate your organizations and express what the expectations are, and set the sort of climate, and continue to sort of invest in it over time. And a lot of senior leaders, I think, they get so bore-sighted on their tasking, the to-do list, that they forget that they need to invest in it. And when they turn around after being heads down in all the business of whatever, they find that they have morale issues and they have some performance issues. Usually, it's because they didn't put enough time and effort into the climate building.
Right. Great, Mike. And I wanted to say, I used to be the chief technology officer at Defense Intelligence Agency, and I would joke with people and say, look, I like people and technology, just not in that order. Okay, not a funny joke, but people would laugh. But really, even for a nerd like me, it's all about the people. I'd walk the halls of the combatant commands and other centers and DIA itself, and you talk to the people and see how they're using the tech and what their mission needs are. And so even for a nerd like me, I understand it's really about the people.
People say mission first. People always, I kind of like the way that combination, works. So you have to find the right balance between those things. Sometimes people will take up more of your time. Sometimes the mission work will take up more of your time. But be careful of being imbalanced for too long in any one direction.
Yeah, Mike, I want to talk about another subject that it's on almost every page of your book, either explicitly or kind of implicitly, and it's the word proactivity. This is a very proactive book. It's about taking action and reaching out and poking the universe and making positive change. And you do have a couple of stories in there that just hit that so well. And one is about Kathy Johnson. And I was wondering, can you give us a few minutes on Kathy and why you decided to single her out in your book?
Yeah, so bias for action is really important trait to have no matter what organization you belong to. And Kathy Johnson was somebody that was a China hand, somebody who was an expert in China, who I met over 20 years ago, and we got along swimmingly. And I liked how energetic, enthusiastic she was. She was a go-getter, and she wouldn't let bureaucratic obstacles get in her way. She just was able to sort of ride above the fray and not be sort of dragged down by rules and regulations and all these things that sometimes stop people from doing the right thing. She respected those, but at the same time, she was able to hurdle over them. And I think it shows for her the power of charisma and personality. But fundamentally, she was a very assertive person. She's wired to get results. And her mission focus, her noble causes, right, were so clear to people when she would open her mouth and describe them that they all wanted to help her. And so I was lucky enough to intersect throughout my career with Kathy in a number of ways, but it was really the most amazing thing that we were working together in Indo-Pacific. She had been picked up as the deputy director for intelligence there, the deputy J2, and I was the director for intelligence in Hawaii and Indo-Pacific. And together we were able to really get after our problems. And Kathy was a fire and forget weapon, as they say, where you could just, hey, Kathy, we'll need to do this. And, it was done in lightning speed there, because she was able to call up, go direct, talk to folks, didn't matter your rank, your title, et cetera. She could cut through the bureaucratic red tape and just get stuff done. She was an example in my book of assertiveness because I think if you don't have that, that you won't be able to be as successful in achieving what you set out to do. You have to put the energies in the right place. You have to drive forward. You have to have an iron will. You have to treat people nicely along the way, and you can still be professional and do things honorably. But you need to focus that energy and get it going to be able to achieve your hardest objectives.
Right. Would you, and that's very well put. And I think she is an exemplar. And I'm so glad you told that story because I've heard many wonderful things about her, but not so well put. And I really appreciate you highlighting her like that. You also hit a couple proactive stories about Rich Haver and Admiral Bill Studeman. Can you recount the story there that you reveal in the book?
Well, there are a couple stories I put in there. Do you want the maritime strategy one or about the Walker case?
I think the Walker case is a tremendous example.
Yeah, so my father ended up being a four-star admiral, great model for me as a up-and-coming leader and how to do things right, enlightened, inspiring, principled leader. So I was very lucky to see that, every day of my life. I learned more about what he was involved with later on when I joined the Navy. And I had a family friend, Rich Haver, but just like myself and Kathy Johnson were together and trying to get things done in the 21st century, Rich Haver and my father were trying to get things done in the 20th century during the Cold War. And before they became Director of Naval Intelligence and Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, they had spent some time when they were a few years more junior trying to support the Director of Naval Intelligence in figuring out a problem because it seemed as if the Soviets had prior knowledge of a number of different U.S. Navy exercises. They would show up well in advance to be able to monitor with their intelligence collection ships. There were other indications that they were anticipating our moves. And Rich Haver and my dad were looking around at whether or not we had a mole, whether or not we had some kind of compromise of our classified systems. And they had a strong sense that, in fact, there was a spy somewhere within the Navy that was compromising our highest end communications. And they went around to all the fleet commanders describing the problem, and nobody believed them because what the Navy would have to do to actually figure out or change their whole communications sort of mechanism was just too horrendous, and they thought that they had too little to go on. So fast forward to 1985 when they're in charge of naval intelligence, and lo and behold, we learn about the Walker spy ring. Walker and his brother and his wife and his son and others had been stealing our secrets in the Navy and giving them to the Soviet Union for many, many years. And so they went around and they briefed the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Defense praised Rich Haver and my father and said, "You're the hero." And Rich Haver says, "Sir, frankly, I don't think that I'm a hero at all. My job is not to warn of these things. My job is to persuade somebody that it's real so they'll do something about it." And Colin Powell, who was a two-star general at the time, was in that meeting with Secretary Weinberger and touched Rich Haver's shoulder on the way out after that conversation and said, "You're right, Rich. Intelligence officers are useless if we can't believe them." And so that's a story of their challenges at the time, very real stuff, and the consequences of leadership that can't quite get over the line to convince somebody that they need to do something significant in order to take care of a problem. So in the end, the story, I guess, had a good result, but we potentially faced war-losing intelligence given to the Soviet Union at the time, based on how much they knew about us.
Yeah, well, I think this is a very good story, not just for intelligence professionals, but anyone who needs to understand the importance of change in an organization that could be maybe a little more bureaucratic than it needs to be. But you fired another neuron for me, and I wanted to say that both those guys, Admiral Bill Studeman and Rich Haver, were crucial to me as I became the J2 at JTF C&D, the first cyber command. They were so generous with their time, their advice, their guidance. Right before that, they were at an OpIntel summit down at Nimitz, where Admiral Max Showers was one of the guest presenters. And he talked to OpIntel during World War II, recounted his views of the famous story of the Battle of Midway and how intelligence was crucial there. He also had a story about proactivity and how Rochefort and others decided that if we're going to figure out which area the Japanese are headed towards, we're going to need to deceive them a bit and put some information out there and see how it's reflected in their code. That proactivity allowed these code breakers and intel professionals to figure out that, yes, Midway is the target. To hear those kind of stories right as I'm taking over as J2 at JTF C&D, and then to have Rich Haver and your dad recounting more about proactivity and getting engaged and things I had to do was crucial. Then we had a major espionage event, Moonlight Maze. And Rich Haver, I'm talking to him about this, directs me to go read Oleg Penkovsky's The Penkovsky Paper. Now, Penkovsky had died like 20 years earlier, but still, the lessons in that book just lined up so much with the actions that were occurring in our networks, it made it clear, this is Russia doing this. And then that was kind of my version of, hey, this is Russia. I don't have all the evidence, but it's Russia. And sure enough, as it unfolded over the next several months, we got plenty of intelligence that indicates it was Russia. So those two were great mentors to me, and they were also all about proactivity.
We're back to nation-state challenges that aren't just the stuff of old movies, Hunt for Red October, and old spy tales. We sometimes forget as a country that this nation-state versus nation-state geopolitical dynamic has a whole bag of dirty tricks, and there are plenty of ways that our society is going to be undermined from within based on how open we are by the Russias of the world, the Chinas of the world. And I sometimes fear that our senior leaders, maybe a reflection of some of this amateurishness that has found its way into our polity, into our organizations, that a leader that would truly be great would be able to define reality and define the nature of the geostrategic dynamics that we're facing, and then be able to show America that their stakes are involved, their wallets are involved, their employment is involved, our prosperity as a nation are involved, our values, our security. And I sometimes worry that so much of our internal divisiveness takes us away from the bigger issues that will hurt us more as a country if we don't talk about them and manage them. This strain of isolationism, which makes no sense for America's role in the world and our own place in it, is going to backfire. It is the wrong course for our nation. And so how do we understand the realities of our time? How do we mobilize our society to deal with them? It takes great leadership that understands what's happening and can communicate that simply with the American people. And until we have those kind of people, we're going to end up being weaker for not getting after these problems. And they're just as challenging, if not more, in the 21st century than they ever were during the Cold War in the 20th century.
Yeah. So that's a good, I think, maybe a segue into other topics. You hit upon China in your book a bit, but you're also known as a China expert who's delivered extremely well thought out presentations and public discussions about China. And I wanted to ask you a few thoughts on China, if that's okay.
No, go ahead.
One is I've been trying to understand China for most of my life, and I'm always seeking frameworks that can help me comprehend what's going on. And I don't think I have a good one yet. And I was wondering if you could help me think through, how do I think about China? What's the right framework to understand what that is?
Yeah, I think that's hard because China has so many things going on, and so where do you want to start? I mean, what's your main concern about understanding the business side of how things work and trade and investment? Is it about security and the rise of the military? Is it about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and how they think? I think if I were to offer a framework, it would be something along the lines that it all starts with the Chinese Communist Party and what they perceive about the world and what they need to do in order to survive and to be able to carve out a place for authoritarianism and how to rejuvenate the Chinese nation to be able to achieve their grand goals for their motherland. And so if you look at China today, if you don't understand the CCP, you don't understand China and where it's going. And so you have to get back into reading, frankly, Marx and Lenin and some of Mao Zedong's writings, and you have to essentially understand that the way that Xi Jinping is wired comes from those tracks, those books, those ideologies, and how it guides the way the CCP thinks they need to manage, world affairs, manage domestic affairs. And I think that's probably a really good start point because if you understand Xi Jinping and his thought process, how it's rooted in those kinds of things, which we always wanted to say, hey, communism is dead in China. Socialism is a thing of the past. Xi Jinping has said, not so fast. This idea of where China is going is rooted in our continued enthusiasm and belief that socialism is in fact more superior than capitalism, that authoritarianism and the model of governance they present is better equipped for the 21st century than democracy. And so you've got some ideological elements to where China is going, which if you don't understand, you'll sink back into, well, it's just a business deal over here, right? And I don't understand the rest. I don't need to understand the rest, but it's just this sort of thing where I can make money. Or I'm going to talk about this other issue over here. And you have to see all these things as interconnected because the Chinese are going to continue to press on their ambitions, rooted very deeply in their ideology, and it will define the choices that they make. And their choices, frankly, are redefining the world's choices. And I would just tell you that we're post-peak globalization. I think most people, if you look back at it, you'd say maybe 2019, 2020, somewhere in there, globalization peaked. And if you looked at why it peaked, it's mainly because of great powers and what great powers were doing, China at the lead of all this, to essentially undermine globalization from within. And so this breakdown into new geopolitical blocks, this anti-Western sort of approach that China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, others are pursuing with support from the global South, these are the ways that China is expressing itself, its ideologies, and what it wants to see to remake the world that allows China to have a secure place going forward ad infinitum. Right, so I've probably given you too much, but I think that your starting point needs to come from the leaders and how they think within, Beijing itself.
That's very, very helpful. Now, let me ask a little nuance on that. Is it Xi Jinping and then the Communist Party, it works for him? Or is it the party and Xi Jinping and he better watch it or the party will replace him?
I think there were lots of Chinese leaders who had sort of given up that there were, in fact, the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics had become essentially capitalism. And Xi Jinping came back in, and he said this at the get-go in 2013. He said, socialism is not a euphemism for any other ism. In other words, it's socialism, dudes. It's not simply a code word for capitalism. Our society will, in fact, be defined by the socialist doctrines of Mao Zedong and that era, and we're going to modernize those for our conditions. But that's what he did. He transformed things that way. He was able to take what was a one-party rule into a one-man rule, right? So it's a dictatorship that's a pseudo-totalitarian state at this stage. And he clearly is in charge. He's got plenty to fear. He's got plenty of people that he has made into enemies. But he controls all the lethal instruments of national power. He has essentially put all his loyalists in key positions. He uses his anti-corruption campaigns to do that. He is clearly in charge. It is Xi running the party, running the country, not the party running Xi, running the country.
Very helpful. And Mike, I think this actually gets back to the key point of why write the book. I really believe in America, and I believe we are this close to an age of abundance. If we can just get through the next few years, there's so many great things going on for us, but it's going to take leadership. And it's going to take informed leadership at all levels, corporations, government, and our politicians. And I hope that your book is helpful in that regard and helps us grow more strong as iron chain leaders.
Yeah, thanks. I believe that amateur leadership that we've seen left and right around our country shouldn't be the cause for suffering of America. It shouldn't be the drag that holds back our country, and yet it is. You take a look at key influencers, you take a look at politicians, you take a look at some businessmen and their choices, and people are looking around going, I don't trust them, I don't have a loyalty to them, I'm not going to perform for them, I'm going to go in a different direction, and you find this divisiveness that is frankly causing this sort of identity crisis in America, and frankly dropping us off as a world leader on many issues. Our security, our prosperity, our values are all at stake. We need leaders who can cohere the nation to work together. And as I talk about this in my book, Might of the Chain is about linking together for effects. This is about making sure your own link is strong, that you interlink into a chain with people that you work with, your teams, your organizations, and that you're ready for the heavy lifting of our times, right? We have tremendous major challenges, from geopolitics to climate to pandemics to transnational issues, and we can't tackle any of that as well as we could unless we are going to work together arm in arm, link to link, and be able to work together to lift these great weights of our time. Some of it's relieving suffering, and some of it is taking something to the next level. And our country is mired in this suffering right now, and it will take great leaders to get out of it. It was poor leaders that got us into it, right? And so that's what I put my finger on. I spotlight this, and if I can do anything to contribute to creating more of those great leaders fit for the times, then this would certainly be well worth the time jotting down a few notes in a book.
Thanks, Mike. And now let me say, first of all, I'm proud to be part of your chain. So thanks. You're a great leader, and I appreciate that. But to kind of close out here, I wanted to ask about your personal continual development and how you sharpen the saw. You must be an avid reader. What are you reading now? Or what other steps do you take to keep informed and engaged and keep growing?
Yeah, lifelong learning is a mindset, not necessarily a how-to list. Of course, I plug into the OODA loop and stay connected that way. I have a lot of virtual, sources of information, whether it's Bloomberg or if it's Cypher News, Cyber Talk. When I take a look at publications like Foreign Affairs or The Economist, I mean, it's a combination those things. Traditional books I continue to wade through, and I'm on social media. And actually, I find that although it's coarser, rawer, maybe ruder, being on X allows me to see a full range of views, and some of the commentary allows me to go, they have a point. They didn't express it, very politely necessarily, but that's a perspective I need to understand. I think you need to have a 360-degree sort of learning perspective, and you need to have a synoptic view where you can't just pick a source like Fox News, or I'm going to read just the New York Times, or whatever. You need to actually read things that may agree with you, politically, but read the other side of it too to truly understand. And when we do that understanding, I think it leads to a sense of empathy towards others' position, and it leads to a better ability to find compromise and work together. Look, the country will never agree on everything, but we've found ways in our past to disagree agreeably and still move the country forward. And we need to recapture that. And I think it's a function of how we learn and from where we learn. So the more fulsome your learning can be from as many sources as possible, I think the better off you'll be helping to provide solutions for the country, not creating more problems for the country.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that. And thanks for this time. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for the opportunity. Great questions, Bob. Good to see you again. Thanks for everything.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.